Okay, ALS. This has got to have been up there as the worst fear with my health anxiety, right? I think you can take like almost every other thing that I've like worried about with my health anxiety, and this is by far up there as the scariest fear that I've had in my probably like decade long journey with health anxiety. And I think, again, from looking at my DMs as well and from looking on TikTok and Instagram, it seems like this is a very prevalent fear for a lot of you guys as well, for a lot of fellow health anxiety sufferers. And it makes sense, right? Like, I think with almost like every other scary thing that we worry about with health anxiety, it kind of feels like more controllable. When you think about certain C words that we worry about, yes, they're awful, but we then see stories of people overcoming them, right? We see if you get a skin C word, it's, you can overcome it, right? Even something like a, lymphoma, we see stories of people that overcome it. And so there's almost this like resilience that we build. And I don't know if anyone can kind of relate with this, but there's almost like this resilience that we build with health anxiety where we've gotten to the point of worrying about such scary diseases and things and, illnesses that unless it's like an ultra serious thing, we kind of like have this mentality that, oh, okay, yeah, like it really worries me, it scares me, but it's not as bad as this thing. And I think this thing is for a lot of health anxiety sufferers, and I think a lot of people at some point have had this fear, and that thing is ALS, right? Because with ALS, it is that thing that if you do have it, it's a very scary thing to have, right? And we can say that, right? Like it is a very very scary thing to receive a diagnosis of, right? And I think that's why, almost every health anxiety sufferer at some point has this fear, and probably has this fear on such a reoccurring basis, or it stays for such a long time, because the thought of getting that is so terrible that it's like, oh my God, I give me anything else except that, right? And that's the exact reason that the health anxiety latches onto it, right? Because it knows deep down that that's the thing that you fear most. And I'm just going to spend like a few minutes talking about my kind of story with this, because I think it might, be kind of quite relatable for people out there. And then I'm also going to get on to ultimately how I kind of climbed myself out of the hole of the kind of whole ALS fear, because yeah, for a long time, this was a really, really chronic fear that I had. So my kind of journey with this started probably 5 or 6 years ago now, where I'd started getting, I was doing a lot of traveling at the time, and I'd started getting this twitch in both my foot, and then at night I was getting what I now know as hypnic jerks, and I was getting them in my leg, right? So I'd be lying there and all of a sudden, like, boom, my leg would twitch, and it would be very weird. And as you can imagine at the time, and I think all health anxiety fellow sufferers can relate with this, right? This was really freaking me out, right? I'd never had these symptoms before. I'd never experienced anything like this. Everything else I'd had up until then felt very kind of like vanilla. Like the symptoms that I had were just, breathlessness a little bit, or slightly, cold sweats. Nothing like this, right? Like nothing that felt as like physical as these twitches that I was experiencing. And I think at the time, as it does with every new, thing that we worry about, it felt very, very, very real, right? And it was real. I was experiencing these twitches. And what was funny with this at the time, funny looking back, not funny in the moment, is that the minute I started going down the rabbit hole, right? The rabbit hole being watching patient story videos, Googling the symptoms like crazy every day, using ChatGPT as like my therapist, if you like, at the time. And this was like in the very, very early days of the whole kind of like AI, ChatGPT thing. It was a few years ago, the latest kind of spiral that I had around it. What I noticed was that the minute I started doing all of this spiraling with, Google, YouTube videos, whatever, it got so much worse, right? Like the symptoms got so much worse. It was, not just twitches anymore. It was now, wait, is my like hand weak now? I think I'm noticing like a pain. Like, am I like moving as quickly anymore? Am I, I think I'm like, I feel slower. it was crazy, right? Perceived weakness, the twitches, like the atrophy. I was like, looking at my hand and going, wait, like, am I losing muscle? It was crazy. Like my mind had just become all consumed by this, right? No longer was it just this like innocent twitch, which, at first of all was scary. Now it was like this full blown thing across my body, which was convincing me that I had this. And this is like a really important thing to call out with health anxiety, because with whatever thing that you're worrying about, if you go on a kind of mad spiral with it, right? I.e., you every single day are getting consumed by, a 4-hour Googling session and watching patient story videos and using ChatGPT to, constantly ask it questions and constantly reassure you if you're going to family, and constantly asking them, for them to reassure you, you will almost take on the identity of someone that genuinely has ALS, right? Because that's what anxiety does. It kind of latches onto it and it mimics the symptoms of whatever the thing that you're worrying about, right? The brain is beyond powerful. It literally can take on and I almost like frame it as it will take on the identity of as if you do actually have ALS, right? And it's important to call out because the only way that you can really start to unwind this, and this was the case for me, is you have to stop these behaviors, right? You have to stop the asking your partner or your parent for reassurance. You have to stop the 3-4 hour Googling sessions on WebMD, on YouTube, watching 30-minute videos of like the typical patient story videos where someone's talking about how they'd gone, misdiagnosed for years, and then boom, you've watched 10 of those videos. You have to stop doing these behaviors. Why? Because all of these things are building that identity of someone that does actually genuinely have ALS, right? And your brain almost can't tell the difference, right? It thinks, well, wait, hang on a minute. Like if we're doing all of this, if we're spending 5 hours a day worrying about this thing, then wait, like, do we actually have this? Like, is this actually something we should be worrying about? Boom, 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 right? Alarm bells start going off in your brain. And then all of a sudden this becomes like a full-blown thing that you're worrying about. And not just worrying about, you're actually physically feeling the effects of throughout all of your body, right? And this is why, and this was the case for me when I went through this last fear with it, you have to stop these behaviors. And I cannot emphasize this enough. As hard as it is, right? As hard as it is to not ask for reassurance, to not Google, to not do this, you have to stop these behaviors, right? Because until you do this, that identity that you've built up around genuinely convincing yourself that you have it is not going to break down, right? It's just going to keep manifesting throughout your body. You're going to keep going through those chronic worry patterns in your brain. And it's just like, you're not going to be able to think logically about it, right? Because that's the other thing. There's a term with health anxiety and it's called magical thinking, right? Where you've almost fed yourself so much material about, in this case, ALS, right? You've watched so many patient story videos. You've seen so many different, individuals and, people that have had it, that it almost becomes like a real thing for you, right? You almost just think, well, like, it's almost like there can't be anything else that you get very delusional in how you think about it, right? I remember this was the case with me, and I've had this with so many things that I've worried about over the years, where you've kind of took on the identity of it so much that it then is just like, well, like this has to be true. I have to have it, right? Like you've watched so many videos and patient stories that it has to be true. And that's half the problem with this kind of, especially with something like a worry around ALS, is that, you've latched onto so much material about it that the only way to kind of unwind all of that worry is to stop those behaviors. And one last thing I will say about the, kind of ALS fear is that a lot of the symptoms that you feel in your body that are related to this fear, they are very much anxiety-driven symptoms, okay? Like things like twitches, things like perceived weakness, they are very real anxiety symptoms, right? Now, we've got to be very careful, right? We can't always put everything down to anxiety. But one thing I will say specifically around how, ALS and specifically with things like twitches is that they are very tier 1 anxiety symptoms, right? Like these are the exact type of symptoms that anxiety will create in the body. So as a final kind of takeaway from this video, please, please, please stop the checking behaviors, right? Because until you do that, the identity that you've built up around ALS will not fade away, okay? Hope that helps.